We connected our React frontend to the backend, and obviously connect really just meant sending HTTP requests from inside the React app to the backend. But this is what it's all about. Before, when we worked just on the backend, we only used Postman there. Now we're doing this from inside our React app. But one thing was missing: image upload. Thus far, we worked with some dummy image URLs for both the users as well as our places. It would be much nicer if the visitors of our page could instead bring their own images, if we had file pickers in our forms where users could choose images to use. Well, and that's exactly what we'll do in this module. In detail, you will learn how to accept and handle files, or specifically images, on the backend of our application, so on the server side, on Node Express side. And of course, we'll also cover the frontend and see how we can add a file picker there in our form and then get that file from the frontend with an HTTP request to the backend. All these things will be done in this module. So back in our application, again, I got the frontend opened here in one window and the backend in another Visual Studio Code window next to it. Now it's all about accepting files both on the frontend as well as the backend. And it's up to you where you want to start. I would say let's start at the frontend so that we have a file right away which we then can send to the backend, so that we then as a next step can work on accepting that file on the backend. Now on the frontend, I got two places where I want to accept files. One is the auth page, where new users can authenticate, where they can sign up. When you do sign up, I also want to offer a possibility for the user to provide an image, or not just a possibility, you have to provide an image. So that's one place. You should provide an image here. The other place where I also want to accept the file is in the places area in the new place component. When you add a new place, besides adding title, description, address, and so on, I also want to ensure that you have to provide an image for that place, because we are using images for places and for users, and I have these really nice dummy images here. Well, would be nice to replace them. So in order to do that, I will build an image picker, and I will build a brand new component for that, which we can reuse both on the new place as well as the auth page. So in form elements, in shared components form elements, I will add an image upload.js file. And of course, you can name this however you want. Attached, you also find an image upload.css file, which you can just copy into this shared components form elements folder, so that in the image upload.js file, or in the image upload component we're about to build, you have the right stylings later. Of course, you can always tweak them to your personal preferences. We'll build the image upload component together from scratch now. And in there, of course, I will import React from React, what we always did. I'll set up my image upload component like this, like this, accepting props from outside, and then in there we'll later return some JSX. And of course, we have to export the component here so that we can use it in other files as well. Now also don't forget to import image upload.css to ensure that the styling gets applied. Now, in the image upload component, I want to return some JSX code, of course. So let's write that markup for the image uploader together. Now, as mentioned, of course, there are different ways of building this. Here's just my way. I will add a wrapping div, which has a class name of form-control. This class name, form-control, is provided in input CSS. And whilst you might think that we're only importing this here in input.js, don't forget that all these classes generally are available globally in the application. They're not scoped to a component. We're not using CSS modules or anything like that here. Hence, we can use the form control class also in the image upload component. Now in there, I want to add an input, and that input will be of type file, which is a default input type supported by the browser. This input will also receive an ID of, let's say, props ID, and also a little inline style here, just a quick and dirty solution, where I set display to none. This is how you set inline styles in React. You set an object to that style prop, and then you have your CSS properties on the left as keys, and then the values here on the right as values. Well, and I use display none here because I actually want to hide this input. With display none, it's still part of the DOM, but it's not visible. Because I will expose a button to the user, which the user can click to bring up that file picker, I don't want to show this file picker itself because it's relatively ugly. So I will hide it here, set the type to file, and set accept here to .jpeg, comma, .png, comma, .jpeg with an E. So these are the file extensions which a user is able to select then later. Now, of course, as I said, this is hidden. So to show it, I also want to render a button. And for that, I will import the button component from /button, like this. Below this input here, but inside of that surrounding div, I'll therefore add a new nested div. This div receives a class name of image upload. And actually, I want to be a bit more flexible there, so I will wrap this and put this into a template literal with backticks. Because I also want to check if we do have a center prop being set equal to true or being set at all. And if it is, I also want to add a center class here. This allows us to later control how the image preview, which we'll add, and the picker button will be positioned if they're centered or not. So, inside of this new div, I'll add yet another div here. And that div receives a class name of image-upload__preview because I want to show a preview of the picked image. In there, we need an image element therefore. And here we'll need to set the source to something and the alt to something. I'll set the alt to preview. The source is something we will come back to. Now, outside of that div here, so of that preview div, but inside of this div, I'll then add my button. And there I'll just say pick image. Now, of course, we have to set a type here, and I'll set this to type button so that it doesn't accidentally submit any form which we might have around our image upload component later. And I will, of course, add an onClick listener, so this onClick prop, to point at a function that should execute when the button is clicked. And for this, we can add a function here, the pickImageHandler. The pickImageHandler should be triggered whenever we click this button. And in the pickImageHandler, I, in the end, want to make sure that we open this built-in file picker so that we utilize this input component, which is invisible, but which, if we could click it, would open up a file picker. So, therefore, to simulate a click on this, we have to get access to this input element and then just call its click method. And to get access, we can use a reference. So we can import useRef from React and now not use it to store some value which survives re-render cycles, but instead to store a value which actually does survive re-render cycles, but which most importantly establishes a connection to a DOM element. So here I'll have my file picker ref created with useRef and set this here on input by adding the ref key and pointing at file picker ref here. And then in the pickImageHandler, we can use file picker ref .current and then call the click method. This method exists on this DOM node and it will open up that file picker. So we utilize the input element without seeing it. That's my idea here. Now, when this gets clicked, the file picker opens, and once the user chooses a file, onChange fires on this input. So here we have to provide a function that should be triggered once the user picked a file. So here I'll add my picked_handler function where I get an event object, and I will wire this up to onChange here, picked_handler. And now here in the picked_handler, the goal is to generate something that helps us preview that file down there, and of course to then also forward the file to the surrounding component where we use the image upload component in. So for the moment here, I'll just console log event.target, which is the file input in the end, and see what's in there. And now let's go to our auth page here and import this component. Of course, we're not done with it yet, but for the moment, we can already use it. So I'll import image upload from shared components, form elements, image upload, and use that here in the auth page. There, my idea is that just as with the name input here, I only want to show this image upload button if we are in sign up mode. So I'll have the same check here. If we're not in login mode, then I want to render image upload like this. And for the moment, it can be as simple as that. I'll just forward an ID here, and that's the image ID. This ID will be picked up in the image upload component. For example, I bind it here to this input. If we now save that, and this reloads, and we go to authenticate and switch to sign up mode, we see our file picker here. Now it would be nice if that would be centered, so back in the auth page, I will add this center prop to image upload. And now if we switch back to sign up, we see this is centered. Now that's nice, but of course, this doesn't look that great, seeing, well, no image at all. But what we can already see is if I click pick image, this file picker here opened up automatically, and I can select an image there. And thereafter, you see this log on the right, which logs this, well, this file picker element to the developer console. So this is generally working. Now we have to work on managing this file correctly, creating a preview, and getting it into our form here so that we can submit this in the end. So let's continue with our efforts to build an image upload component. We see that this console log fired when we picked a file. Now my idea is to manage the file here inside of the image upload component to create a preview, which we have in there, but to then also, of course, pass it to the surrounding form, which in the end needs the file to then eventually upload it to a backend. So whenever we need to manage something, which also should update the DOM, it's of course time for a use state. So here in image upload, we definitely need use state because we will have a file which we want to manage with file and set file, which initially is undefined, but which we will of course set at some point. I will also generate another state, the preview URL, and set preview URL, which in the end, well, is the URL of this image preview which we want to generate so that we can show a preview to the user. And last but not least, I'll also add isValid and setIsValid here and use this. And initially, let's say it's not valid here by initializing this state to false. So 3 states which I'm managing here. And now with that in the picked handler, it's important to know that in the event target which I logged, which is this input element, you will have a files property that holds the files the user selected. This is default JavaScript. You get that files property on the event target if that event target is a native file picker, which this one here is. So we will have the files here, and therefore we can check if this exists, if it's not undefined. So to ensure that this does not somehow get fired without the user picking a file. And I also want to ensure that files length is not equal to 0. And of course, this should be an AND, a logical AND. So now we're ensuring that we have files and that if we have files, we have more than one file. Actually, we could also check that it's exactly one file. There shouldn't really be a way to pick more than one here in this app. But if you would manage to do so, I certainly don't want to handle it because we only support the upload of one file at a time here. So we check whether we do have files and if it's exactly one. And if that is the case, we can continue here. Because if that is the case, I want to extract that picked file from event target files and get the first and only one, and then call set file and set it to my well-picked file, to the extracted file. I will also set isValid to true thereafter because we have a file, and then we can return to not execute any other code. Otherwise, if we don't make it into this if statement, we know we picked something wrong. Well, in this case, I want to set isValid to false here. And actually, we can remove the return statement here and instead do this in an else block because then after the if statement, no matter into which branch we made it, we can call props on input here. So I expect to get an on input prop here on the image upload component, which should point at a function then, to which we forward the ID of this input, which we also received through props, and this picked file if it exists. Now it does not always exist, of course. So actually let's set picked file here to be a variable and just assign a new value if we do have a file, and otherwise it will be still undefined, which is also fine here. And of course I also forward is valid. Now here it's just important to understand that when we call set is valid, it does not immediately update this state value. Instead it schedules this state update. So when I call on input here and I forward is valid at this point, it will still be the old is valid value. So not the new one after this update. So actually here, I will add a new variable, file is valid, which I set equal to the current state of is valid. And then here I set is valid, but again, this does not update the state immediately. So in the meantime, I will set file is valid to true here manually and set it to false here. And then just forward file is valid here at this point. So we always basically call the function we receive on input, and we always pass our picked file, but that file might sometimes be undefined if we didn't pick a valid file, and we will forward the validity information. That's my idea here. Now, this doesn't help us with the preview though. Now, I want to generate the preview whenever we got a new file, so whenever we basically updated our file state. Now, doing something upon a state change, that screams for a use effect. So here we can add use effect and register a new use effect function. This function here should trigger or should execute whenever the file changes. So we'll pass file as a dependency. Whenever we picked a new file, I want to run my logic here because in this logic, in this function here, I want to generate a preview. So first of all, I'll check if file is not undefined because maybe file changed because it now is not a file anymore, but now undefined. In this scenario, I will return. Because if we don't have a file here, there is no need to continue. We can't generate a preview URL, an image preview anyways. Otherwise, if we make it past this if check, we know we have a file. And now we can generate a image preview URL with an API that's built into the browser, the file reader. So I'll create a new file reader here and store it in a file reader constant. And again, this is baked into the browser and therefore into browser-side JavaScript. The file reader, as the name suggests, helps us read files, helps us parse files. And we can use the file reader to convert a file, which is like a binary data, into a readable or outputable image URL, you could say. Now the file reader has a bit of a clunky API, and to work with it, we have to call file reader read as data URL. Now that's not too clunky, I guess. This is in the end the command to create a URL we can output, but the problem is this does not work with a callback, this does not give us a promise. Instead, before we call read as data URL on the file reader, we have to register the onLoad function like this and execute this function, this anonymous function, whenever the file reader loads a new file or is done parsing a file, we could say. So this function will execute once this reading of the file here is done. And then in here I want to call set preview URL, but then here we also don't get the parsed file as an argument. Instead we have to extract it from file reader.result. Yeah, that's just how this API works. With that, however, we are setting a preview URL, and with that, we can use this preview URL. So down here in JSX, on the image, I now want to output the preview URL here, however, only if we have one. So let's check if we have a preview URL and only output the image if that is the case. If that's not the case, if we don't have a preview URL, I will output a paragraph where I say, please pick an image. And in addition, I also want to output an error text, which can be provided from outside, so from the component that uses the image upload component, in case we picked something invalid, which should be pretty hard, but still. In this case, so if this is not valid, if isValid is false, I want to output props.error text here. With this, if we now save that and we switch to sign up here, I do have my image picker, and now I can pick this image, and here's my preview. It also crashed though. Props on input is not a function. And that makes a lot of sense, because remember that in the picked handler, I do call props on input. So I refer to the on input prop, and I expect to have a function in there which I can call. But at the moment when we use image upload in the auth component, here, I'm not setting this on input prop, so we need to do this. And there we now need to point at a function. And you might think that we now need to create a new function, but thankfully that's not the case. If we have a look at the on input arguments we're passing here, we see it's the ID, then the file that was picked, and then the validity of this file. Now, that is pretty similar to what we have in the input. In our input component for regular text input, we also in the end call on input at some point, and we forward the ID, the value, and whether that value is valid. Now that's exactly the same as we have here. Here I have the ID, the value, because the picked file is just the value of this control, if you will, and then the validity. So therefore, in auth, we can just bind this to input handler. So on input takes the input handler function. And in case you don't remember, the input handler function is coming from our custom form hook. Here it is. So we can manage our file, our picked image, with our form hook as well. Because the form hook, our custom form hook, does really not care about the data we're managing with it. It doesn't have to be text data. It can be a file as well. We should just make sure that whenever we switch modes, if we switch from sign up to login, we add an image key and set this to undefined, because when we switch from login to sign up, we need to add an image key and set this to an object where the value, let's say, is null initially, not an empty string, because we're not working with strings here. Later, we'll store a file there after all. And isValid is set to false. And now this should be part of our general form validation and of our form data. Now to confirm this, in the auth submit handler, I will console log form state.inputs so that we can see whether our picked file is part of that or not. And with this, if we save all of that, switch to sign up again, and enter a valid name, valid email address, and a valid password, we see the sign up button still is not enabled. If I switch back to login, it is, but in sign up it is not, because the image hasn't been picked yet. Now if I open that picker and close it, that's still not enough. But if I now pick an image here, like this one, you see this gets enabled. And if I click here, of course, we get an error because we already have a user with that email address. At least I here in my setup already have such an error. But from our log here in line 70, we see that we have the image and the value is indeed just such a file. And we can submit this file to the backend. This will be something we have to work on. This will be possible though. So picking the image works. Now before we ensure that we also can pick an image when we create a new place, why don't we work on the backend and make sure that there we accept such a file. Thus far we worked on the front end and we can pick a file there. Now let's move on to the backend and let's ensure that there we also accept such a file so that you can indeed attach it to a request, and here on the backend we then extract it and store it. Now for that we'll add a third-party package which helps us with that, Multer. You can just Google for Multer. It's a Node.js middleware and it's built for Express.js as well, so a Node Express.js middleware to be precise, that helps us work with multi-part form data. Now that's a specific type of request body we can submit to the backend. Thus far we used JSON data. Now we will actually switch to this different type of data for some requests. And the special thing about this type of data or this data format is that it can contain a mixture of normal text data and file data or binary data. Because JSON can only work with text data in the end. Of course, it can also include numbers, but ultimately that's all just text, right? You can print it. Now, binary data is different, and JSON format can't deal with binary data. Multi-part form data can, and I will show you how to adjust our requests we send to the backend to use this kind of data. But first of all, let's prepare the backend with this package to accept such data. So for this, we need to run npm install --save Multer, and then here you can learn all about it, but of course I will also guide you through the steps you need to do to set up Multer. So let's first of all install it on the backend, not on the front end, but on the backend. Let's run npm install --save Multer. And this will now install this package into the backend. There, on the backend, I will now add a new folder, the middleware folder. You can name this folder however you want, but I create it because there I want to store my own custom middleware. And one middleware is the file-upload.js middleware. Of course, Multer already is a middleware that will help us, but I will basically configure it to my requirements and wrap it into my own middleware, which I then export. So how does this work? In the file-upload.js file, I will import Multer, first of all, like this. And with it imported, I will execute it as a function to which we can pass a configuration object. The result of this function is the actual file upload middleware Multer provides. And you find these same steps basically in the official Multer docs as well. So this is now a middleware which we could use in our Express middleware chain. Therefore, here in the end, I will export file upload. So I will export this middleware. And then we can adjust our configuration here in a global place and use that pre-configured exported middleware in any other file we want. For example, in the user routes. There we have the sign up route. And on the sign up route, we of course want to accept images to be uploaded. So here we can import our file upload middleware by requiring it from the middleware folder, file upload like this. And then here on the post request, on the sign up request, before we run any other middleware, we can add file upload.single image. This is how you use the Multer middleware. The concrete middleware is actually the result of this single call, file upload. So the thing I'm exporting here is not yet the middleware. It's an object that has a bunch of pre-configured middlewares. For example, a middleware to retrieve a single file, which we get access to with the single method. And then we have to specify the name in the to be expected body of the incoming request that will hold the image or the file that should be extracted. And I here expect to have an image key on the incoming request, which should then hold the, image I want to extract. So this instructs Multer to extract that image or that file on that image key on the incoming request before we continue with the other steps. The question just is, what does Multer do with that extracted image? Of course, we want to store it somewhere. So here in the file upload.js file, we can configure Multer a little bit. We can configure it to tell it where to store something and also which files to accept. First of all, I want to set a little filter here, a limit for our files. We can set a limit in byte here, and I want to set this to 500,000 bytes to have an upload limit of 500 kilobytes. And of course, you can adjust this to your personal likings here. Multer also takes a storage key, and here we can control how data should get stored. Now, this storage key requires a Multer storage driver, and Multer has a built-in disk storage driver. So we can call Multer disk storage to generate such a driver, which we provide to storage. Now here we can set certain object properties on an object we provide to disk storage to configure that disk storage. And there we can specifically set a destination key to control the destination where files get stored, and also a file name key to control the file name that's being used. Now both take functions here. So we pass a function to each of these keys. The destination function here gets the request object, the file which was extracted, and a callback, which we have to call once we're done. The file name function here also gets the request object, also the file, and also a callback. Now let's maybe start with the file name. There, I first of all want to extract my extension of the incoming file. And for that, I will create a little helper constant up there, which I'll name MIME type map. This is a simple JavaScript object where I will map certain MIME types, which look like this, to certain file extensions. And I'll do this for image, PNG, and also for the 2 JPEG types we have. Why am I doing this? Because Multer gives us some information about the MIME type it found for the uploaded file. MIME types look like this and basically tell us which kind of file we're dealing with. So with this map, I can derive the right extension from the identified MIME type. So I can use my MIME type map here and dynamically access the property that matches my file.mime type. This is the file object Multer gives me, and there I have various fields. One of them is the MIME type Multer found. MIME type will look like this, and therefore then I extract the right extension here. Because I dynamically access one of these properties here. These are valid properties in JavaScript, we just have to wrap them in quotes. I dynamically access one of these properties and get the extension that's mapped to it. So this gives me the extension I want to use. Then I want to call this callback, pass null as a first argument. We could throw an error here, pass in an error if something went wrong, but that shouldn't be the case here. And then the file name I want to use. And there I want to generate a unique ID, and for this we can reuse a package we installed earlier, the UUID package, and import v1 for example, and then call UUID to generate a random unique file name here, and then just add a dot and then the extension. So this generates a random file name with the right extension. This is passed as a second argument to callback, and this in the end is handled internally by Multer to then use this file name. Now in destination we do something similar for deriving the path where we want to store this. It's simpler though, I just have to call callback here. I got no error, so I'll pass null as a first argument, and then the string which describes the path where I want to store this. And here I want to go for uploads/images. And I will therefore create a new folder here, which I'll name uploads, and in there a new folder, images. And that is where I want to store my data, just like that. With all of that, the disk storage is configured. Now let's continue configuring Multer, because I also want to set up a so-called file filter, another property we can pass to the object we use to configure Multer. The disk storage is important for storing the file correctly, but of course we also want to validate that we don't get an invalid file. Of course we also have some validation on the front end already, because in my image upload component I already have this accept attribute set on the input, but you learned that on the front end everything can be hacked or simply changed by the user with the developer tools, for example. So we can't rely on front-end validation. We don't do that for our other fields, and we shouldn't do it for our files. So on the backend I will add a file filter here. This is a function which receives a request object, the file, and then also a callback, which of course is the same pattern you already saw there. Now here we have to call this callback either with an error if validation failed as a first argument, or with null as a first argument if it succeeded. So therefore, first of all, I will add a constant isValid and then check in my MIME type map if I can find the file MIME type here. So this here will retrieve PNG, JPEG, or JPEG if I have one of these MIME types. If I have another MIME type, it won't find an entry here, and therefore it will return undefined. So now with the double bang operator in front of this, we convert undefined or null to false, and we convert one of these findings here to true. So now we have either true or false, however not here, but here of course. So now we have either true or false stored in isValid. Now next we can create our error here. And there I will basically check if isValid is true. And if that's the case, I will set this to null because then we have no error. But if isValid is false, so if we have some invalid upload, then I will set this to a new error where I say invalid MIME type, like this. And then we can forward our error, and the second argument is a boolean that basically informs Multer if we accept the file or not, and here I can forward is valid, because if that's true, we forward true, we accept the file, otherwise we don't. Though if you pass an error, and that is a real error, you already deny the file. So adding a wrong file should now not be possible. This is the finished configuration of Multer, and with that we should be prepared to accept and store files. With this, we can save this. We are applying this middleware to our sign-up route. Now we need to head back to the front end, and of course also restart our backend server, but then head back to the front end to make sure that we send the right type of data to that backend, to that sign-up route, and include a file in our HTTP request. So back to the front end. There we pick a file, and in the auth page, it's part of our FormData as we confirmed. Now we need to attach to the outgoing request. And now we need to do something interesting here. We need to send different type of data. Thus far, we always send JSON data. Now sending JSON data still is correct if we're logging in, because then we only submit text data, email and password. And important, when I say text data, I mean all data which we in the end could write like this in JavaScript code. So including arrays and objects, anything we can read as a human. Now for images, that's different. Images are binary data. We can't write an image like this here, right? So therefore, we can't use JSON as a format. Instead, we want to use a better data format. And that would be FormData, a format which is already built into the browser and into JavaScript, thankfully. We can create new FormData like this. It's a browser API, so it's available just like this. We don't need to install any third-party package for this. And we can store this FormData in a constant. Now to this FormData object, we can append new data. And the cool thing is, on FormData, you can add both normal text data, so things like the email, the name, or the password, but you can also add binary data, so files. So here I will append email. You first, as a first argument, need to specify an identifier. Then, as a second argument, the value for this identifier. So in this case, of course, form state inputs email value. So what we have in JSON down there as well. Now we can replicate this 2 times to do the same for the name, and of course refer to form state inputs name.value, and then here the password, and refer to form state inputs password.value. This is the data we submitted before as well. So for this, we wouldn't need FormData. But now we can add, or append to be precise, our image. And this should have a key of image, because on the backend, if you remember, I'm looking for this image key here with this line. I'm looking for a request body key named image, which includes my image. And we set up this request body key with this line in the end, because we'll append FormData as our request body in just a second. So this has to be image here, but other than that, it's of course FormData inputs image.value, because we are managing this image file in our regular form state. So now we can fine-tune our request. Instead of sending JSON stringify data, so instead of just sending JSON data here, we just add our FormData. And the cool thing about FormData is that the fetch API, which we use under the hood in send request, automatically adds the right headers. So we don't need to set headers manually anymore. Instead, it should just work like this. And this should send a request with FormData, which includes all our old data, but now also our image. Now back on the backend, our controller, our user's controller, and their create user might not fully work yet. We'll see if this extraction here still works now that we're not sending JSON data anymore. We're also not using the file here, by the way. We're storing it on disk, but then here we're not storing a pointer added in the database or anything like that. So I'll come back to this as well. But for the moment, let's just save this and see if this upload process in general works. save the frontend as well. And then go back to the React app, switch to sign up, and let's try creating a new user, pick an image, and of course also pick a URL. For now, this can also be a used one, and click sign up. Now we get user exists already, but if we go to the backend, we also see that in uploads images, we should have a new file. And this is the image which just was uploaded. So the upload works. You also see, of course, that this means that despite our validation failing, the file was saved. And the reason for that is that when the validation fails, that of course means that we in the end throw an error here in the user's controller. Here we're checking whether we have validation errors. Now, by the time we reach this code, of course, all our middleware is executed, so the file indeed was stored. So if we want to undo that storage, we'll have to roll it back manually. And in general, in the controller, we're not doing anything with the file. That will be the next step. But what we can see here already is that the general upload and using FormData works. Now let's just make sure that we also do something with the file here in signup. So, controller time. Let's work on the signup controller and make sure we do something with the file. And do something with the file actually means two things. It means link the file to our user in the database, so create a real image URL, but also roll back the creation of the file if we have a validation error, for example. Now let's maybe start with the rollback mode. If we do have a validation error, so if we're in here, then I don't want to continue. I instead want to delete the file. The same, of course, is actually the case for any error I have here anywhere. So if I have an error here or anywhere else, this does not matter. So you could argue that it makes sense to integrate this rollback logic into our general error handler, maybe. So in app.js, we have this general error handling logic here, and there we can check if we do have a file, and if we do, we want to roll back because we had an error. We certainly don't want to keep it. Now the cool thing is Multer adds us a new property to the request object, a file property, if we do have a file. So we can check if this is set, and if this is set, we know there is a file as part of the request. So the request where something failed had a file. We now want to delete that file that was stored on the disk. To delete it, we can import a Node.js core module, and that is the FS, the file system module. Here, like this. This allows us to interact with files in our file system, and it allows us to, for example, delete files. So with this imported in our error handler here, we can call unlink. Well, this doesn't sound like a delete, but this is in the end what it does. It deletes this file. So here we then just have to point at the file. We can do so with request file path. Path is a property that exists on this file object, which Multer adds to the request, and this points to the file, and this will delete it. Now on unlink, provide a callback here, which will be triggered when the deletion is done. You get an error, which might be thrown if something goes wrong, but here I'll just log it. I don't care about an error here. If file deletion failed at this point, it is what it is, but we can always manually clean it up. It's not horrible if we still have the file around. With that, delete the file which is currently stored in images and save everything and try that submission again. So let's click on sign up here, and I get user exists already. Please log in instead. But if we now go back, we see nothing is in images, and that is great. So we correctly roll back this image upload. So that's one thing. Back to the user's controller, we can now also use the file for something more useful, because rolling it back, of course, is nice. But more importantly, we want to store it on our user which we create. We are extracting our data here, and Multer will give us this body property on the request with all the text fields it found on the incoming request body. So we will still get that thanks to Multer. But in addition, we have this request file thing I showed you. And with all that information provided, we can add it all to our user. So now here, on the user we create down there, I want to replace this image field here with HTTP localhost 5000 / plus request.file.path, which should be uploads/images/filename. This is the image URL I want to construct here. Now, storing the full URL here certainly is one thing we can do, but we could also argue that we want to prepend this thing here on the front end, actually. So we could just store the file path here in our image field, not the full URL, just the path on our server. And with that, new users should have that path included. Now, to see that in action, I'll go back to MongoDB Atlas and actually delete all my users I got here so that I can start from scratch again and I don't have any existing users in the database. So let's delete all the users we created in here. Step by step, every one of them. And whilst this is deleting, I'll also go to places and also delete all the places I created in the past. In my case, that's one place. So let's delete this as well. And with that, we should have no more places and no more users. We got 2 empty collections here. And we can now go back to the React app and leave the credentials here as we have them and click sign up. And this doesn't look too bad. Now, this image is not displayed here yet because we're storing just the path on the server, not the full URL. But if we have a look at our users collection here again, we see our user and we see the image path here. And now we just need to tweak the front end a little bit, and on the users page, or to be precise, inside of the users list, on a single user item, here on the avatar, what I pass here to image should of course include props image, but since this is just a path, I'll wrap this here into backticks, and instead point at HTTP localhost 5000 / and then here dynamically inject props.image. And if we do so and save this and go back to the React app, it still doesn't work. And you see we got a not found error. Now the URL actually is correct though. It's localhost 5000 / uploads / images and then the image name. So why is it not shown here? Because we need to change more on the backend. We're still not seeing the image here, despite using a correct URL, because there is something important you have to understand about the backend code, or the way Node Express here works, and servers in general work. By default, none of the files on the server side, so in our Node Express app, are accessible from outside the server. And that's good, because otherwise we could just enter localhost 5000 / app.js and have a look at the source code there. But fortunately, this does not work, because every incoming request on the backend goes into our middleware funnel here in the end. And it goes through all the different middlewares here, and only the logic we have in the middlewares executes. So you can't request any file. You can just go through the middlewares, and you either have a request that's handled by one of the middlewares, or you don't. For example, if we send a request to a URL which ends with /API/places, we make it into our places routes, and that's how the logic there kicks off. But for some random image link, we got no middleware that would handle this. Now, of course, however, we want to grant access to images. And to do so, we can add a new middleware. Maybe here, after parsing request bodies, we can add a new general middleware and then filter for requests that start with uploads images. So requests which have localhost 5000 / uploads / images at the beginning of their URL. Such requests will be handled by a special middleware which is actually built into Express. Express static. You can execute static as a method, and this will return a middleware actually. And this is a middleware which just returns the requested file. Static serving means that you just return a file. You don't execute it, you just return it. Now here we have to control which files in which folder we want to return. Express static then wants a path pointing at the folder from which you want to serve files without any extra check. Now, such a path has to be an absolute path, and we can build this with the path module, which is built into Node.js. So we import it with this syntax here and expose it on this path constant. And then here to static, we pass our build path where we join two segments, uploads and images. And this builds a new path pointing at the uploads images folder. And any file in there, if we request it, will be returned. Otherwise, all files are locked down, but files in this folder, if requested, are returned. If we save this, and now we go back and we reload our app here, we see our image therefore, because now we're statically serving it. And with this, the upload works and serving it works. Now, of course, we have no places for a user. So let's make sure when we logged in that we can actually also add a place here and that we have an image upload here as well. Now, this is a great practice for you because essentially the steps are the same for uploading an image for a user. So definitely try this on your own first. In the next lectures, we'll do it together. So let's implement image upload when we add a new place. For this on the front end, let's go to the new place component. And there we need to, first of all, import our image upload component. So image upload from shared components, form elements, image upload. Now we can add this to the form there. So here in our JSX code, maybe below the address here, we can add image upload. Now, of course, this now is an input which is always rendered. Unlike in the sign up form, we don't switch between different modes here. The ID can be image and should be image to map this to our form state later. And on input here is bound to our input handler. The error text which we can provide can be, please provide an image, though I didn't do that on the sign up form actually. So let me quickly go back there, and on the auth page on image upload, I will add that same error text here. So here on image upload, I will also add this error text. This is in the auth page now. A little oversight back then, but normally this can't really be invalid. So back to new place, we got our image upload added there as well. Now let's add it to our form state. So here, when we initialize our form, I add the image key, so the ID we used in JSX as well, and set the value to null initially and is valid to false. This key here, of course, has to match the ID we have down there. So with that, we should have an image upload field there as well, and it should be part of the form data. If we now send a request, we of course need to send form data therefore. So let's add our form data here with new form data and append the different data pieces we have. So the title, for example, which of course is retrieved like this from our form state. And then we repeat this for the description like this. We repeat this for the address. And for the moment, we also need to add our creator here. We don't get the creator from the form state though, but from auth user ID. Once we have authentication, this will change, by the way. Now we need one more input, one more form data piece, and that is our image. And this has to be image because we will retrieve this by this image key later on the backend. Right now, I haven't added logic to do so though. But for the moment, let's stick to the front end. Let's store the image here in the image key and of course refer to image here, therefore. So now here we can remove the body and the headers and just add form data to our request we're sending. So this should send a correctly configured request, but now we also need to work on the backend. For one, in the places routes, just as we did it in the users routes, we need to add this middleware here. So in places routes, let's add an import and import the file upload middleware from require middleware file upload. Or actually, as you learned, this is not already the middleware. It's an object with a bunch of middlewares, and we get the right middleware by, for example, calling single. So here on this post request, I will call file upload single and look for the image in a key in the body which is named image. So with that, we're extracting the image upon the creation of a new place as well. Now in the place controller, we have to handle it. We have the rollback logic in app.js in our global error handler, so that should already work. We don't need to add anything there. But in the places controller, I of course now also want to link the image to a newly created place. So in create place, we're extracting the other data from the request body, which is fine. But then here, when we create our place, the image is no longer a URL like this. Instead here, I will use request file path, just like this. This is now what gets stored in my newly created place. And now we just have to go back to the frontend again and make sure that we output or use the right URL there. So on place item, where I render the image of a place, I will wrap this here into backticks and then output localhost 5000 and then dynamically output props image in there so that we use the path which is stored on the backend and connect this with our URL that points at the backend. With all of that, let's save it and let's give it a try. Let's log in here with the user we created and add a place, Marienplatz, a great place in Munich. The address, Marienplatz 1 in Munich, and pick an image. And here I prepared an image for me already, which is a picture of the Marienplatz. And now if we click add place, this loads. We're redirected, we got one place, and here it is. This is our image of the Marienplatz. Now if I edit this, this also looks really, really nice. Editing is reflected here. We can view it on a map, and we got our image here. And on the backend, unsurprisingly, if we go to images, then we see our user image, which we uploaded earlier, and that image I just chose. So upload is working here. And with that, we're able to upload images for both users as well as places. Now, last but not least, I want to make sure that when we delete the place, which I'll not do here, but in a second, that we also clean up the file that belongs to the place. And at the moment, we're not doing this. If we have a look at our places controller in delete place, we of course get rid of the place, we of course get rid of the connection to our user, but we're not getting rid of the image that belongs to the place. Now, we don't necessarily have to. We could also write a script which cleans up every month, or we do a manual cleanup, or we want to keep all the images because we're using them for some machine learning algorithms or anything like that anyways. But if you do want to clean it up, it's not too hard to do. Before we get rid of our place here, I'll get the image path here out of the place. In the place document, we can simply access this image key, right? Because that is where we do store our image path. So I get access to this image path, then I delete everything in the database, which is the important thing, because if deleting the image should fail for whatever reason, it's not that bad, it's okay, we can do a manual cleanup. So after all this database cleanup, I want to delete the place. Now for that, I will again import the file system package Node.js offers, because this gives us this unlink method. And with this imported, at the end here, at the end of delete place, we can call fs unlink and use our image path here, which I extracted from the document up there. So now this is what I want to delete. Unlink takes a second argument, a callback function, which might hold an error if things go wrong. Here I will just log it to the console. You could do more with it. I certainly don't want to wait for this to complete though. We could send the response in here to wait for this to complete, but I don't care. This deletion process is started, and as I said, if it should fail for whatever reason or something like that, it's not the end of the world. So with this added, if we now save this, and we go here to the frontend, and I click delete and confirm this, it deletes it here. This looks good. We got no error here. And now if we go back to the backend, we see only one image, and that's our user image. the place image indeed is gone. And if we quickly have a look at Atlas, we should also see that there the places collection is empty. And if we have a look at our users, we got the user, but the place key was deleted from its places array. So this is now the cleanup finished, and this ensures that when we delete something, when we delete the place, we also delete the image that belongs to the place. This is it for the file upload. Adding file upload has two sides. For one, we need to add it on the backend. Here we use the Multer package and the middleware it offers to us, configured for our needs. So we're configuring the place where it's stored, how the file name is named, and which files we accept. We do this with the help of the MIME type map. Then in the controllers, we simply extract the path, which Multer gives us automatically, and store that in a database. So not the file is stored, but just the path of the file, just a string. We don't want to store files in a database because that would bloat it, slow it down, and be a really bad practice. Store files on the file system, locally instead. Now, in case something goes wrong, we have app.js, where we roll back our file upload if the request where something went wrong has a file attached to it. So if some other request goes wrong, we don't roll it back, of course. And on the front end, we built this new image upload component, which allows us to pick an image and also show a preview. And we easily integrated this into our existing form hook and the form management we have in place already. And then the trick just was to use FormData to submit the data to the backend so that we can have a mixture of text and binary data. And that is it. This is file upload added to a MERN app.